Having recently onboarded as the CMO at BitLab, I wanted to start a fun interviewing series with you. I wanted to be raw and unedited footage of us just sitting down in this virtual room and me picking your brain on your personal experiences as a fractional CTO, the history of BitLab, as well as any unique and useful insights that we can share with our audience in the world. Something that will be especially useful to non-technical startup founders such as myself. And oftentimes we talk and realize that we wish we were recording and sharing this with the world because in a sense, it's a bit selfish to hold back all the knowledge that could really help startup founders and CEOs that are looking to build software. It's clear that you have a lot of experience, so I just really wanted to pick your brain and ask any questions that come to mind. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sounds awesome. Let's go for it.
Perfect. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey before BitLab? Who was Shoukri before he became a fractional CTO with his own software development studio?
So I started my career 17 years ago. I was in Israel. Like my first job was working on, so I'll take you back to my college days, or my university. I'll take you back to my university days where a friend of mine called me out of the blue one day and he's like, hey, there's a startup. Do you want to go work for a startup? And at that time, I was doing software. I was doing computer systems engineering. And I actually didn't know what a startup is. And I'm like, okay, what is that? What's a startup? And I started kind of researching what startups are, stumbled upon TechCrunch, went for that interview, nailed that interview. This was a very successful guy. His name is V. Schreiber. Was like a super successful founder, insane track record, sold startups to IBM, multi-million dollars. And the guy was like a superstar. And he was starting, this was 2007. AWS cloud computing was like a new term, was not heard of before. AWS was in beta. And I went and I'm like, hey, what are you guys building? And he kind of shared with me the vision where we're building a whole computer on the cloud. So that was my first startup. I got in, started working there, started building, and my first job was building like a cloud infrastructure. So building like file systems on the cloud. This was, again, keep in mind, this was before Google Drive existed. AWS itself was like beta days. And I started kind of that journey of, oh, that's what a startup is. A startup is, it is not a company. A startup is not a small version of a company. A startup at best is an experiment in an attempt to build a company. We were backed by very big names in the space. So Benchmark Capital, one of the well-known VCs in the US, invested in a whole bunch of startups. We were backed by like very big names. And we had a serious amount of funding. And we also had an entrepreneur with an amazing track record. So I thought winning was like guaranteed. We're going to ace this thing. We're going to exit. You know, I was allocated shares. I was excited about it. I dreamt about, the glory of it. And then this was shortly before the 2008 financial crisis. We go to the financial crisis. And then all I know is, Zvi Schreiber walks into the office one day and he's like, guys, bad news, we're shutting down. And, all the dreams, all the glory, I'm like, what? Impossible. How is that even possible? And it's, back then, environment was bad, funding was bad. We couldn't raise, even though we had traction, we had the file system I built. There was more than like 5 million files shared from all sorts of users. We had very complicated infrastructure spanning 200, 300 servers. It was massive. And I'm like, wait, all of this massive thing, like, how did we fail? And bottom line is we didn't have revenue, right? We had users, we had growth, but no revenue. And if you find yourself in that environment, which we're right now in a very similar environment, that's the end goal. So I learned a lot of valuable lessons from that first startup that, you can have the best entrepreneur and backed by insane, founders, or you can have the best entrepreneur backed by insane amount of capital with a success track record, and just due to environment and market timing, you can still fail.
Was it just the market timing, or do you think in retrospect that was preventable if the revenue was just had a bit better track record?
It's not, I think we could have I think there is market timing, it plays an element in that. But the other thing, and I think we had some control. I think you could have taken the same idea, slightly tweaked it, and you would have gotten a very different startup, and that startup could have been successful. My favorite example with that, us and Dropbox started in the same year. We had a recipe. Part of what I built, the portion of the startup that I built was extremely similar to Dropbox, but that was only part of the product. We had a much bigger vision, like much grandiose vision of a full operating system. But if we looked at the data of our product well, we would have noticed the trend that nothing else was being used except the file system. This is what people wanted to use. And we were going after the big vision, and we failed. Versus Dropbox started at the same time, started very, very narrow with, we just want to store files on the cloud, and kicked ass. So I think market timing is it, but also market positioning is what will make you or break you.
And focusing on one thing, one service, one message, one market, one ICP. It sounds like.
Yes. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, dude. I have, let me see. One of the clients pinged me. Let's just see if there's an emergency.
Yep. What kind of inspired you to start BitLab? Was it a procedural process, or is it one day you're like, you know what, like that's it, I'm making a company today?
BitLab was born out of pain. So actually, BitLab started in 2013. And the company's name was Lean Sprint. I was obsessed back then with the kind of concept of lean startup by Eric Ries. And I wanted to do something with startups. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And Lean Sprint was started kind of consulting for smaller startups. The model back then was completely different. I was like just a CTO alone and just kind of working with different startups, advising, but no team. It was just me, like a one-man operation. Then fast forward to, this is kind of 2013. I fast forward to 2015, 2016. I started to work with another startup, and we needed a team. We needed the whole team. Like it was me, and the job turns out to be a huge, humongous platform that we needed to build, and I needed more people. And I didn't think of hiring my own people in-house to begin with. I decided to go and hire a dev agency. And with, and I suspect lots of entrepreneurs will have similar stories where you kind of go hire an agency, the relationship starts extremely well, they present you with the best people they have, and they put their best foot forward, and things start great. But then halfway through the project, the best people that they brought to me started disappearing, and they started to be replaced by mediocre people. And what I saw, I didn't, and a lot of it is they hide this, right? Like a lot of agencies will not tell you who's working on what, who's doing what. And you just know there's buddies, and maybe you're interacting with 1 or 2 people. But what I saw as a CTO was my defect rate is rising significantly. The quality of what I was building was going down extremely fast. And I started to, I got really curious about what's happening. Why is it the case? And that led me to find out that some people left the company. Some of the best people I had on that project left the agency. And I went digging after them. I'm like, why did you guys leave? And they're like, dude, we were underpaid. We were significantly underpaid. We were straddling multiple projects. We were doing all of these things that I wasn't aware of. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So maybe this is a case of bad vendor. And the same experience repeated with a couple of more startups I was helping. And I'm like, okay, this is nonsense. This is garbage. This is not going to work. This is not sustainable. And the agency model is great if you're building IT services, but is not the best approach for startups. And so the new BitLab was born out of identifying that a typical software agency expects you to kind of give them very clear specifications of what you want built. And that, if you're working with an enterprise client, with a large client, that works. But if you're working with a startup, things are changing daily. Your market, who you think the customer is changing daily. The entire opportunity is dynamic. Again, back to, it's not a small version of a company, it's an experiment. So what you want is a team or is a structure that lends itself well to such experimentation.
That's very interesting. Do you look for particular qualities, or how do you develop a team that's specifically tailored towards startup as opposed to a dev agency that wants particular specifications and works better for enterprise clients? Like how do you develop something like that? Is it just are you looking for flexibility in your developers, or how does that work?
It's a few things, actually. One of them is I call project thinking versus product thinking. When if you're an agency doing IT work, you're thinking, hey, I have this product, I have this project, I have these specs, I'm gonna deliver on these specs. Like, you have tunnel vision, these are the specs, I need to ship this as fast as possible regardless of the cost. Or regardless of the time, ideally, I want to ship this. Sorry, I'm gonna redo this. So project thinking is, hey, I have this IT project. How do I get this project or whatever, or this scope done as fast as possible? You're not really looking at the product. You're not looking at usability. You're not looking at UX. You're not looking at the experience. You're not looking at the customer journey. You're just looking at, how do I take these specs, translate them into code, and ship it and get it over to the other side and hand it over to whoever is on the other side of it. Versus when you have product thinking, it's very different. It's really more about the user journey, about, is the onboarding smooth? Is the product doing, like, the jobs to be done? Does the product solve the jobs to be done? Can I prevent churn? So you're looking at very different aspects. And most software development agencies, they don't have that product thinking. They don't focus on, how do I polish the product? The polish is always missing. The user experience is always weak. And I learned this from attempting and failing at my own startups. Like, between 2007, since I started my software career, to today, I've launched, or I've been part of, more than 40, 50 startups. And some of them were my own self-funded, bootstrapped. I was a lone founder with one of them. And with each one of them, I learned something new, or I failed at something different. One of them was, I failed because of wrong partners. Another one, I ran out of capital. A third one, I failed because UI UX. The fourth one, I was bootstrapped and going against a company that had $10 million in funding. They kicked my ass. And so all of these mistakes that I learned, I was able to take them and do the next one better, and the next one better, and the next one better, and the next one better. And that allowed me to create the BitLab playbook. And part of this playbook is kind of, one, helping founders avoid all of these common mistakes, such as, here's one story. So there's this startup that I helped, based in Canada. These guys had an engineering team, and their burn was around $100,000. And if you look at that team that they had, it was expensive because the entire team was onshore, but the quality of the resources was not great. Like, it's the salaries, like how much or how good of a developer can you find at the market at a certain rate? So let's take an example. I think this will be clear if I give an example. I'm gonna redo this piece. It's shit. So one of the startups I helped, they had $100,000. They spent $100,000 a month on engineering. And I went in to see, how good of a talent I got at that $100,000 price point. And unfortunately, because they were hiring local, and in that market, there was a ton of competition. So we were competing for talent with the Amazons, with the Metas, with the Salesforces of the world. So the quality of the people we got was not that great. They were like the bottom of the barrel, and we paid $100,000. And me coming from, keep in mind, I was not born and raised in Canada. I was offshore. I was the offshore talent at the previous point in life. And that's a playbook that I played. Like, I was that remote talent at some point. And then there was a company that I was part of, Telcocell, where this is when I moved to Canada. This is 2010. So I moved to Canada to join a startup. And I was developer number one. And I landed in the middle of a massive project, massive IT project. We were doing work for a client in Canada. And they're like, hey, Shoukri, go figure this thing out. And I started to look at that project. I'm like, this is massive. I can't do it alone. I need at least 10 people. And so the CEO back then, he's like, I don't care. Figure it out. So I started to look locally, and the salaries were insane. And then I'm like, hold on. So this was after the startup Ghost, which I told you about in Israel, shut down. So I'm like, I have an idea. Maybe I should go just to hire all my buddies that worked in that startup that failed. Everybody's looking for work. I know I can get them at insane rates. And I know the caliber of the talent is insane. So can I do that? And Telcocell, I hired, I hired my manager. that was fun. Like my manager at
What a play.
Yeah, I hired my manager and then hired the top talent I had then. And in about 2 years, I grew from myself alone, lone developer, to 40 people. I had an engineering team of 40 developers. And we've grown the startup to an extent that we were in acquisition talks with a very big enterprise. And so about 3 years in, we got acquired. And that playbook worked out extremely well for us. We had really good business, we had lucrative margins, and we sold, and we got acquired, and we made our money, all relying on offshore talent. And I'm like, this model works. And so when I took that playbook of offshore talent plus local team into the next startup, and the next startup, and the next startup, and the next startup, and that model always worked. And I made it work because I'm kind of used to that remote environment. I'm used to kind of building relationships. I'm used to managing remote teams. So I'm like, I took all of these strengths that I had. I took that model that I knew was cost effective, especially for a startup, right? If you are an established business, you might hire differently. You might have a little bit more capital to spend. Versus if you're trying to boot an idea off the ground, you want quality, but you don't have much money to play with. And so that playbook worked well. And then we continued with this playbook. And obviously now, if I kind of fast forward 17 years, now this, after COVID and everything else, this became everybody's playbook. But in my opinion, I'm probably one of the first people in the world who played that playbook.
Gotcha. So the foundation of BitLab is built from Lean Sprint, which is built from that experience in 2010 when you grew from being developer number one to a team of 40.
Yes.
And then the playbook, you keep mentioning this word playbook. What does this playbook mean to you?
So to me, the playbook is all the practices, whether the playbook is a series of best practices around engineering, around product, and around discovery, customer discovery. Because that was, as a lone founder, this is also where I failed. I failed because initially I thought a startup is a small version of a big company. And so you kind of hire the people and try to play company. Versus a true startup, it's an experiment. And so your job is to experiment really, really fast and either fail fast or win fast and see where the traction is and keep going and keep kind of doubling down on that. Now, where I failed as a founder, the biggest mistake I made as a founder was thinking that if you build it, they will come. I thought if I kind of build products, then people are just going to magically find these products, learn about them, and flock to them. And because I'm a builder, this was like extremely dangerous because keep in mind, I'm a builder myself. I know how to build software and I have access to talent. And that combination was extremely dangerous in my opinion, because, oh, it's so easy to build. So I fell into the trap of build, launch it and hope people will show up. And I did it once and nobody showed up. And I did it twice and nobody showed up. And I did it the third time and nobody showed up. And then eventually it dawned on me there's something called marketing. I kind of started to learn more about marketing. I started to learn about like Eric Ries, Lean Startup. I started to find the writings of Steve Blank, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And those people kind of changed the way I thought about the startup. And then, I took their advice and then I tested it and then I perfected it and then I kind of changed it and then I tweaked on it. And with every other failure, I kind of tweaked on what do we do? How do we launch? How do I find customers? How do I find a market? And then how do I build tech efficiently to get to the point where I actually can become a company?
With such a large focus on proper discovery and proper market research and raising of the funds before building product.
And
How?
and maybe I'll break it down because I think it's 5 steps.
Okay.
There's discovery, then there's design, then there is the development piece, and then there's testing piece, and then there's the launch piece. And a lot of entrepreneurs will kind of skip discovery, skip design. And by design is not just UI, UX design, it's offer design. Like how do I design an offer that is compelling? And also how do I design a UI, UX that is compelling? So you need to do the discovery first. Like this is a sequence. And if you jump into the middle of the sequence, which many entrepreneurs do, they skip discovery, they skip design, and they jump to development. And the result is you build a subpar product that appeals to no customer because you skipped identifying exactly who the customer is. So you want to do discovery first to know who the customer is and what is his pain point. Then you go into what is a compelling offer? How much money am I going to make out of that customer? Because that also shapes what you're developing, right? You can build a Mercedes, right? Like my favorite example of this is if you think of your SaaS or product as a vehicle, right? You can go and build a Mercedes or BMW or a Lambo, or you can, build a bike. And all of them are vehicles and they'll take you from point A to point B. The difference is though, how much money do you have to spend? If you have $100,000, you can spend it on the Lambo. The customer is paying, no problem. But you don't want to also build the Lambo solution and trying to sell it to, for $5 a user. So this is where you can have to, before you build the product, you need to know who you're building it for, at what price point, because that will also dictate a lot of the engineering you do into the product.
Achieving product market fit.
And achieving product market fit.
So there are 5 distinct steps: discovery, design, development, testing, and launching.
Yeah.
Out of these 5 steps, where does BitLab step in and help? At which point in this journey?
With all of them. But
With
ideally,
all of them.
Yes. Now, discovery, though, we don't want to run it. We don't run discovery on behalf of a founder. We'll give a founder a playbook and we'll guide them through the discovery because we believe that customer insights is something that the founder himself should go out to the field, talk to as many customers as they can, identify the pain points, pick up the language. We don't want to do it. Can we do it on behalf of a customer? Yes. Can we facilitate that and do a good portion of it? Yes. But that touch with the customer, we want the founder to go through that because he's going to learn a lot of valuable lessons that we don't want to deprive the founder from learning. So we help with the discovery. The design is where we start. Like formally is the design is the piece where we start with the UI, UX. We help with the offer design, but we don't understand the founder's business. Or we might have a good understanding of that business, but we don't want to give them our insights. We're not in that niche. So we might share some insights, we might share some valuable lessons because we worked in many industries. But we want the founder to go and find the niche himself. Once he's done that, now we know who the user is. Now we can do the design. It's also a crazy story. We worked with a startup. They thought we designed an app for truck drivers. And if you don't know who if we started with a fascinating app, we did like a really cool UI UX around the app, but then we didn't know there was like a very important piece of information. The average age of a truck driver is 50. So if you design a Tinder-like or a Snapchat-like experience, trying to give it to a 50-year-old driver, he doesn't know how to operate that thing.
I wouldn't have guessed it's 50 years old. I would have guessed closer to like maybe 35.
Yeah, apparently not. Apparently drivers in the logistics industry are like really, really old people. And this is actually a big problem for the logistics industry. So going back to, I would have designed the same app, but the UI UX would have been different. If I knew that the customer is actually 50 years old or 55, so the demographics, and going back to the niche, going back to who the customer is and who the user is, because those people, most of the time, the customer is not the user. The customer is your buyer, the guy who pays the bill, but your user could be somebody completely different. So in that case of the logistics, our buyer was the logistics broker, but our user was the truck driver. And the truck driver was 55, was old. He didn't want to use his own data plan because he paid for it personally. So this is where, if you didn't know the user behind it, your solution is going to look one way. And when you know who the user actually is, he might change entirely your solution.
Gotcha. Going back to BitLab, what were the biggest challenges you faced in the early days of BitLab?
I think the challenge is you have to build two pipelines. The challenge in general building and like a company like BitLab is you have to have a constant influx of customers or startups that we're helping, and then you also have to have a constant influx of talent and finding the right talent. This is one of the most important pieces, because if you have the startups that you're helping, but then you don't have the right talent, the model can't work. And then if you want to go invest in the top talent, but then you don't have an influx of startups to help, that's
Demand.
Supply and demand. And you have to, it's also like marketplace startups, right? Marketplace startups, it's tricky because again, they have double sides. And for us, it's the same idea, is that you have two sides. You have to build your front office and you have to build your back office. And then it's kind of coming up with a model that would be sustainable for us and for the startups we help.
What does that sustainable model look like at a high level, where supply perfectly meets demand? Or where demand exceeds supply?
Oof, that's a good question.
Yeah. I would argue it's when demand is always higher.
Demand needs to be always higher. Demand has to be always higher, because that allows you to kind of supply just the right amount, and then allows you to invest in the supply of talent. And building, like, to me, is like these two take massive effort. Like this, it's a significant effort in months to years to build a supply pipeline, to build a talent pipeline, and also to build a customer pipeline, which you and I are going through right now.
100%, because for the longest time, 90%, 95% have been through referrals, which is great, right? Yeah. That's a sign of a successful business when everyone just starts referring and bringing in their friends and sharing a great service with them. But there's a certain point where the economy tanks, outside forces happen, and now we want to scale, right? And this is where we have to do a bit of outbound and not just inbound.
Yeah.
How did you go about assembling your team? Because earlier we talked about product for focus versus project focus.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of qualities are you looking for in your developers to make sure that they're more so product focused?
So give me 1 second, because I want to. So I'll point you, if you go to the BitLab website,
Mhm.
You'll see that we can have certain values about the company. And we hire based on these values. And if I want to kind of just take you through what these values are. So we look for people who, one, have a good sense of integrity, because we strive to do, I believe, if you want to, I'll quote Naval Ravikant here. Naval, one of my favorite quotes of Naval is, you want to play long-term games with long-term people. And when we do business, we look for founders who can have that long-term view, the long-term view of, how they want to do business. And we share that because we know that in the long term, doing right by the customer, whether, this comes at a cost to us, we know this is the right thing to do. So that's kind of one of the values we look for. Ownership, a sense of extreme ownership is another one. So there's types of people, whether developers or just people who like, you tell me to do ABC, I'm going to do ABC and done, right? Anything else that falls outside of the realm of my, direct assignment, I don't care. And the best people we have a good sense of ownership, that they feel they're part of a team, and whether they screwed up or the next guy next to them on the team screwed up, they own up to it, and they're trying to actually take charge, fix the mistakes if there are mistakes, or just ownership over also things that you might have not identified. Like sometimes problems happen, sometimes technical challenges appear. And what you want out of a team is someone who will rise to the occasion, take care of these things. Whether it's your fault or not is irrelevant. It's that, can you take care of it at the end of the day, or you can't? So that sense of ownership. The third one is a sense of mastery. We want people, everybody, like any startup, want people who like want to hone in their craft. They're not happy with their current level. They're always learning, always improving. And as they're improving their product they're working on. They're improving their work practices. And so it's like a constant improvement. The other one is change, because if you're in a startup, change is the name of the game. What you want is people who are able to embrace change and seek and find opportunities in this change, not people who are afraid of, like disrupting the status quo. That's the startup game, right? Like startups, by definition, they're trying to change the world around them. They're trying to change an industry. And so you want to hire people who are kind of embracing that change and are willing to kind of find opportunity in every change that happens. And then another one that I'll share is simplicity, because it's easy to over-engineer. In fact, if you hire a new engineer, his first instinct is to build, and build some more. When you hire someone who's more senior, he's not like that. He's not fast to, oh yeah, I'm gonna go build everything by myself. A senior will, you give him a complex problem, and what you want him to do is he'll look at it and he's like, how do I simplify this? If I give you 50 requirements, hey, can I cut half of them? Can I not do half of them? Can I take this shortcut that will simplify the entire process? And this simplicity is what sets apart the best products. The best products, in my opinion, are super simple, yet extremely powerful. And to nail that, it's a mindset that you have. The people who work on your product, you want them to have this mindset of, we want simple, especially when it comes to user experience, to the user journey. The simpler it is, the better. Apple does this extremely well. If I look at, for me as a developer or as a technical person, I look at iOS and I look at Android, and I freaking hate Android. It's no secret. We still develop apps on Android, but I hate Android. I hate Android because it kind of exposes you to all the details under the hood. There's a ton of features, there's a ton of settings, there's a ton of tweaks that you can do. However, if you ever observe the normal user or a normal person using their phone, there's only so many things they want to do. And don't care about all of this customization, all of this tweaking. What they care about is give me the easiest, simplest way to go from point A to point B, to get the job done, to get the message sent, to get the email sent, to take a certain action. And so that simplicity, I believe, is what creates the best products.
It's really funny that you mentioned Android versus Apple, because literally just this weekend, I ended up getting this little guy,
Nice.
my iPhone 15 Pro Max. I've been an Android user for my entire life. Never have I had an iPhone. But after doing more research, like I've realized, first of all, they're getting really ahead of the tech game. Second, it like the experience is so good. I'm really enjoying my iPhone right now, and I can't believe that it took me this long to join the Apple team. I guess it's always been the fact that I've kind of been in the tech space, and being very much a Slav and utilitarian and in tech. Like I figure, you know what, screw Apple. Like those guys are artsy. Those guys are the creatives. They can use their crappy, you know, artsy products, whatever. Just keep it on the silence. And I'll always bash Apple. But the user experience has been amazing so far, and I'm super glad that I switched. And it's like you said, keeping it simple. And most people only need so many things, and that's exactly what I talk about. Whenever I'm on a call selling LinkedIn automation platform, because that's one of the things that I do. One of our main competitors is the Android of the space. And I ask them, do you want an Apple or do you want an Android? And for most people, it ends up being Apple, because your sales team doesn't care about all these extra features. They just want those invitations and those post likes and messages getting sent out. They don't care about all the extra nuances. They just want it done, and they want to do it in the most painless way possible.
And your job as a product builder is to give them that, is to shield your users from all the complexity that is, and you kind of put all that complexity under the hood. You don't have, the user is not, you shouldn't make the user think. If you made me think, you lost the game when it comes to usability. And so the best products, and this is something that Apple is really, really good at. And I know people say, oh, once I'm locked into the Apple ecosystem, I can't go out. And I agree with that. But I think once you're locked into the ecosystem, I'm an Apple guy. Like I have my iPhone, I have my Mac, my kids are on iPads, and you'll see this once you kind of have your entire family, everything Apple. The simplicity of how you can share images, or you can, exchange notes or text each other, all of these things just become so much simpler. And so the more of that product you have, the more things work together seamlessly, and you don't have to like tear your hair trying to get your phone to sync up to the printer, or your copy data between your phone and your computer. All of this is like seamless. And that's what makes a good product, is that kind of seamless experience, the seamless integration between the pieces. And Apple does it really, really well when it comes to the integration between the hardware and software. If you look at Android, to me, the biggest weakness of Android is that it's fragmented. It's like hardware built by certain companies, and then the software is built by another company, another team. And the best products are when you actually take charge of the entire life cycle of the hardware and the software. Then you can innovate in ways that no one else can.